Hello, and welcome to the 16th episode of Like Clockwork. We are still going, and it has been a really busy week here at Chicago Filmmakers. It's capping off with our appearance at Midsummer Fest, but today is the beginning of a pride-filled weekend as we continue the Reeling Pride Month film showcase presented by Movie with Chicago filmmakers, of course, celebrating the upcoming Reeling Chicago LGBTQ plus International Film Festival. And we are excited because there's a lot of good buzz. Thank you again to Chicago Magazine for placing us at the top of their top 18 things to do to celebrate Pride Month in Chicago. And because of that, we have a very Chicago-based and very Chicago filmmakers based podcast for you today. I am sitting next to Alice Avery. Alice is a Onion City Experimental Film Festival alum and is going to be showing her movie Angel tonight in front of or accompanying the movie The Five Devils, which is presented by Movie. Alice will also be in person for a post-screening conversation. So, Alice, I will turn this over to you. Please give a brief introduction, and then we'll go and meet everybody else at our roundtable.
Okay, hello. I'm Alice. So I make audio visual works that usually include computer generated imagery and mostly sound work that I've developed and like produced myself or with a few other people. And the actual story narrative of my works are generally carried out by either myself or in the future at least somebody who's hyper performing in some sort of way. That's my general practice, and yeah.
Thank you very much. And Latoya.
Hi, I'm Latoya Flowers, and I am born and raised from Chicago. I'm a documentary filmmaker and also a multimedia creative in the museum industry.
Thank you so much. And Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Martin. I'm originally from Detroit. I'm kind of I'll talk about this later, a mix of things curator, programmer, arts administrator, amongst other things here in Chicago.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's really a privilege. After this show, we have a little bit of a break. So, this is actually a very special show for me. So, I'm very excited to get into the conversation. To begin with, we are going to spotlight Alice. And Alice, you have around 10 minutes.
Okay.
Please feel free to tell us all about what makes you tick.
So hello, I'm Alice. I'm here. I'm partially here in order to like show Angel, which is the thing that's screaming before the Five Devils. um I'm also here to talk. I have an upcoming project that I'm working on, and it relates very closely to Angel. And it also Funtown Journey, which was my video that I premiered at Onion City a month ago, a month and a half ago. Um, it's kind of strange to me thinking of like the timeline of all this, because my last few months have been really dominated by my facial feminization surgery that I had. I was basically completely um, out of like being able to do any sort of work for a while. Um, like just sitting at home and literally not even being able to get up and go to the bathroom. And that's actually when I got the email from M asking me to show my work here was I was like on really intense painkillers, and I was like, I don't know, I was in like this surreal fever dream of whenever I slept when I was on those painkillers. Is I don't know, it didn't feel like I was sleeping. It felt like I was just like going to a different place. And I was in a lot of pain, so like I needed the painkillers, but I was like really wanting to get out of that because it was like it just didn't feel like I was ever resting. I was just perpetually like in this limbo. And I don't know, it's just interesting because like I feel like I had been trying like that had been kind of like a fear of mine or something that had come up a lot in mm, like my at least thoughts before, but it wasn't actually materialized until that point. But like Funtown Journey into the Living Land, kind of, I I was like predicting that a little bit. Like I don't know. I journal my night or not just my nightmares, but my dreams in general, and I like categorize them into specific locations and themes. And one like recurring theme is being trapped in some sort of artificial world where the rules are governed um, by some sort of um, like omnipotent force, but the rules aren't necessarily the same as they are here. I mean, partially just because I'm asleep, it's the way that my brain thinks is different, but it's like there will be specific places that I can't go to, or I'll know that I can't speak, or I'll know that I can't walk, or I'll know that it's not always the same thing, but it switches up. And that was part of like the motivation for me making Funtown Journey into the Living Land, where my character is kind of going on this adventure where she's being kind of like her reality is being like very distorted and controlled as she's trying to just like I don't know, like get up, figure out where she is, and go about like a very like basic task of like going to Target is what like ultimately happens. Like something that should seem simple, but for whatever reason, there's like it becomes insane, and I don't know. She gets possessed or she becomes unpossessed, depending on how you look at it. There's an alteration in her brain state, but I don't know. So I feel like a lot of my work recently has like led up to I don't know. There's like a certain type of feeling of I think that a lot of like trans people can relate to in general, and I'm sure that people who aren't trans can also relate to this, but um, like feeling like there's some like maybe malevolent force or something that's like eating away at your body, like because I've had just there's a lot of like health not even just like health issues, but like with being on hormones and with like especially with my surgery, but even before the surgery, um I like sometimes I would just feel like everything in my body was wrong or like everything like and it's not just like physically, like it would be like I would like feel sick. It's like if my hormone levels were off, I would start feeling gross. And I was trying to like come up with a way to like rationalize or like I don't know, make it feel like something more important. And I kind of I don't know, had felt very connected to I don't know, a sort of like supernatural force that like grants me power through it. So like maybe I'm being like possessed or attacked or trying to be like entered by some sort of like being and I'm fighting against it or I'm submitting and like it's not necessarily clear whether it's malevolent or whether it's good. And that's something that a lot of my work recently has related to. And then also my fear of my surgery was like I think something that was like really present because both Funtown Journey and Angel I made before I got my surgery, and Angel came out really quickly. Like I shot it pretty much all by myself um, over the course of like total like a few hours, and I edited it together. And there was like the only reason that it was actually able to happen is I had this image of this um, computer generated cabin, and kind of in the void, and I don't know. The more I've talked to people about it, people have different viewpoints of it. I had just made this and literally just put it on Instagram, and I had this like concept for a project of something almost like vampire-ish, where I would like consume somebody in some sort of way. I just watched Thirst, um, by Park Chan Wook, and I don't know. There was like I was just felt really intensely connected to this scene where I don't know, a vampire was being like forced to go out into the sunlight, and I don't know the conflict that brings up and trying to survive. But I sorry, but yeah, I was trying to make this thing, but I was making it all by myself, and there were some shots that were like it was all like in this void, and I had to use this like weird green screen that I didn't even have a real place to set it up. I ended up setting it up in my apartment. It took up the whole place, like the whole apartment. I did it when my roommate was gone for a day. They didn't even know that it happened. It's like I shot like over the course of like 6 hours one day. I set it up and then I took it down without them knowing that I just did it. Um, but but the only reason that I was actually able to like get the motivation to do that was that my friend just randomly like sent me this little demo of like, and it was completely, he didn't know about this project at all. Like he didn't know that this is something I wanted to do, but he sent me this demo of just like an image of that house that I made with like this really eerie cello score that he had made of like him like I don't know, like kind of like nails on the chalkboard sort of thing, and that ended up being in the like a big part of the that's like the whole beginning, not the whole beginning, but like a big part of the beginning portion of the video was inspired by that sound and this one moment of like the reveal of this house in the void. Um, and yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my friend Alejandro, who's going to be here today. And I don't know, he's going to be working a lot with me on this upcoming project that I'm doing. But yeah, I don't know, it's just very cool how things come together. But this upcoming project that I'm working on is basically just a larger scale continuation of the sort of styles that I've been developing recently, but with a much more intricate um, and character driven storyline. Because I just love, I don't know, I've wanted to make like something almost like feature length for a while. I don't know, like for like realistically for like longer than makes any sense. I used to make these like feature videos where I would just take like hours and hours of footage, and then I would open up Premiere and I would listen to like Hyperpop, and then I would just close the video preview, and I would just spend like hours just randomly cutting together like hours and hours of footage into 2 hour clips and say, this is a feature, go watch it. And then people would watch it and they'd be like, what? And like I got some people who like asked me questions. They were like, what does this mean? And I was like, it's up to you, like figure it out. Just because I think it was funny that people put so much like sway into like feature like the length aspect of it. So I was like, okay, what's the easiest, dumbest way for me to make something that's long, but where people don't know what's going on, so they can't just be like, oh, that's what you did, but they're like, what? So I would do that, and sometimes I think my main market was people who were like really high, who would just watch it and be like so confused. But I haven't made one of those for a while. I've done some like sound stuff that's kind of like that, like randomly chopping things together, but I don't know, that's still like sometimes a part of my workflow just because it gets me thinking about stuff differently. But yeah, but this project, I don't know, I do a lot of like fantasy world building. So like visual art, like that's what started me doing like 3D modeling, is I just like sketch and draw a lot, and I have like a whole world kind of creatures that I've been developing and wanting to incorporate into my work. And so that's kind of like the reason that I've wanted to make a more connected storyline. Like it's like wanting to make something longer isn't even about like, I don't know. It's not. I think that I've realized that like the only way that I can make the thing that connects all the stuff that I do together, like rather than just have them be these separate things, is through a longer narrative story. Because like I like bounced around in a lot of different mediums, and I don't know, I'm always struggling to like be like, okay, this doesn't like mean anything to me. Like, why am I doing this? And I think that's kind of like my goal, is to like, I don't know, is to take lots of different forms of creating that I'm doing, and to situate them in a space that doesn't necessarily make them make more sense, but makes you think in some way about them. And the way I've decided to do that now is through a narrative um, story with more traditional. No, I shouldn't say that, but some sort of characters interacting. And yeah, I'm excited, but it's gonna be a lot because I've like a lot. I've avoided working with actors a lot because honestly, I just like practicality of filming. I like performing, and so it's easier for me to create the thing that I want if I'm just doing it myself. But I've realized that for the purpose of this project, I want there to be multiple people, and I want their stories to interconnect in a way that I just wouldn't practically be able to do with myself. It would take like way more work to do it just myself, which I considered, but I don't think that's what's gonna happen. I might play a few characters, but maybe like a demon and then a normal version of me. Which, yeah, I don't know.
I am going to have a lot to add to that, actually. One thing that I haven't told you, Alice, but that really resonates about your work, especially for me, is just the means by which you are putting together both a symbolic performative language, but in the ways that it's also constantly creating these fantastic spaces, right? The illusional space or illusory space, and then how that space is torn down. It's interesting because it's also the way that you conduct performance. Like your performance sometimes brings the elasticity of what can be accepted as real to its breaking point, but then it gets reconstituted once again through its sort of like persistence, like past that point of the artifice breaking and then back into another even more frenzied shell. So there's something about the things that you're encountering, and I also find that this exploration into a very 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 I hate to maybe put it in these terms, but I'll expand on it. There's some spiritual like ground that gets revealed through what you're doing, and so I very much look forward to bringing that back into conversation. And now we're going to move over to Latoya. Um, this is amazing to be able to continue this conversation. Latoya, of course, is also a former grant recipient from Chicago Filmmakers, and will, I'm sure, tell us a little bit about the really important work that she's doing. So, Latoya, without further ado, thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm pretty much gonna just talk about like my journey becoming a filmmaker and how I merged that world with creating multimedia for museums. So my journey really started in film school in undergrad a long time ago. I was like taking a documentary class at the time, and I think I was the only one that was really interested in it. Like everyone else was more interested in the narrative filmmaking classes, and so after taking that, I knew that that was more of the area I wanted to focus on and study in when I was in college. And so after graduating, you trying to figure out like where you're going to work, what's your first time job going to be. So I started interning at Films, and that's where I got the like real world experience of what it's like to work on multiple documentary films, and I really grew my passion from there. So after interning there for a while, I was trying to find a job and still couldn't find anything. And so then I decided to go to grad school in New York. So I went to the School of Visual Arts and got my MFA in social documentary film. And yeah, I love that program. That program taught me a lot about the technical side of documentary filmmaking, not just the storytelling, but how to use cinematography and lighting to like really bring my story to life, motion design. And so being in New York for 2 years, like I developed a lot of connections and contacts being there. And, but I had to move back home. And so I moved back home to get married. And so I faced that challenge that most people face when they're coming out of school and moving to a different city is like, how do I gain connections back in Chicago? Because I really didn't have much. And so I came back to Chicago and, I was back to square one again, looking for a job, trying to figure out how to take all of this knowledge that I have from undergrad and graduate school and apply it somewhere. And I came across a job posting at the Adler Planetarium, and they were looking for a person to create media for their exhibitions. And for me, that was like, the light bulb went off. Like, wow, this could be a really great opportunity. Because back when I was in high school, I've always wanted to work at museums. That always was one of those like dream jobs of mine. Like if I had the chance to do it, I would do it. But I just didn't know how to go about that route. And so I started working at the planetarium and I started creating museums for the exhibitions. I had no experience in what that was like and how it was done. But while working there, I realized that I could use all of the skill sets that I had learned in documentary filmmaking and apply it to that position. And so I felt really glad and grateful for that because I felt like I didn't like waste my time or anything, or I have this degree and now I can't use it. But actually I could. I could use all the skill sets that I had from undergrad and graduate school in this new position. And so that's what I did for 4 years. I created a lot of exhibits that's still on display now at the planetarium about different Apollo missions. I met so many astronauts from the Apollo missions that like from 40 years ago. It was amazing time. And so while working at the planetarium, I started to really get into the idea of immersive experiences. That was starting to grow a lot more. A lot of people then were starting to use more projection mapping, like different ways of creating experiences outside of just looking at something on a monitor or something just on a single projection. Like people now were transforming rooms into a entire experience or the facade of a building. And so I really was trying to figure out like how do I get into that, because it to me at that time seemed really amazing and something that really piqued my interest. And so I left the planetarium and started working at the Field Museum. And I would say, starting at the Field Museum, that's where I got my start of merging my two worlds together, from being a documentary filmmaker to now creating immersive experiences for the Field Museum. Um, and I started with the first project was creating projection mapping on a Sue, the dinosaur. That was a huge project that I had took on, of taking a 100 million-year-old T-Rex skeleton and figuring out how to make an immersive experience out of it. And so I would say that was one of my challenges, is how do I take something like that and create something for all of these visitors that are so connected with Sue and the story of Sue. And so I started really by, diving into the history of Sue and what Sue's life was like, during the Cretaceous period. We had so much research about it, but it wasn't like really properly displayed in a place where people can learn about Sue. We had it in a location where you see this ginormous dinosaur, but you didn't really know a lot of the history about it. And so the museum decided to take the skeleton down and to move it into a new space, um, where you can learn about what other species lived with Sue at that time, what Sue's life was like, on a normal basis, how Sue lived, how Sue died. And so that was one of my opportunities, was merging documentary and immersive experiences together. And so with that, I started with creating like a voiceover narration, talking about Sue's life. And then we tied it together with some projection mapping onto the skeleton, where we pointed out a lot of the bones that are real and those that are fake on the skeleton. A lot of people wouldn't have known just by looking at it. We also pointed out Sue's injuries. That's something that's really visible. If you go to the museum today, you can see like holes in the jaws. You can see like injuries on the leg. And so we use voiceover narration, like stuff that you would use in a normal documentary, but we flipped it. Instead of watching it on a monitor, we put all of the visuals onto the skeleton to point out these things. And so that was the start for me. That was how those two worlds came together. I would say that what some of the challenges that I face in being in both of these industries is, the challenges tend to overlap, like budgeting. Like we struggle coming up with a budget for making a documentary film, but we go through the same thing with creating media for museums. Sometimes we have a healthy budget, and sometimes we have a very low budget, and that really dictates what type of media experience we would create. We have to sometimes make cuts. Sometimes we start off with really big ideas, and then it gets cut all the way down from being an immersive experience to something just probably an animation playing on a monitor or something. And so that's something that I learned over time. I've been at the Film Museum for 6 years now, and that's something that I learned over time, is that there are a lot of similarities in the documentary world with the museum world. Like some of the challenges, the setbacks, they all tend to overlap. Um, I would say the how I approach my exhibits, I really start with the story and the content about the exhibit, what the theme is. Sometimes we cover stories about dinosaurs. Sometimes we do more cultural exhibits, like about the Psalika tribe or Hawaiian culture here in Chicago. And so that's another thing that I love, is that every topic is different. Like when you're approaching a documentary, every story is different, when you're making a new film. I would say that I I really love what I get to do. I love that it's, you know, just constantly keeps me on my toes. Like there's never really a dull moment being in both of these industries at the same time. Um, I like that I get to switch between the two, so I don't get bored just working on films all the time, but I get to switch over and make exhibits half the time. So I like the fact that I get to go back and forth a lot. It helps me to not get burnt out from doing just one thing versus another. Right now, I'm working on, as far as not museum stuff, but documentary stuff. I'm directing my first feature documentary film called Still Searching, and it's about missing Black women and girls from Chicago. And that film follows artist Damon Lamar Reed, who creates these painted portraits of these missing women and girls. And in that film, I'm using different mediums. I first started off with the film being a verite film, and then now it's like 90% animation. And we're using animation to really like tell the story and the memories of these missing girls. They're not here to speak for themselves. You know, they're not here to really describe who they are as a person. So we use their family members to help share that. You know, when you learn about these missing women and girls in the news, you don't really get a sense of who they are as a person. You only hear about the tragedy. You know, you only hear about how they went missing, but you don't really get to learn about who they are beforehand. So we're using a lot of animation to really bring their stories to life. We're also including some verite scenes in it, but I'm really excited about the animation portion. To me, I feel like that's really important, you know, to really show that. And while working on this film, I've been thinking about like the impact campaign and how to do something different besides just film festivals. So I'm thinking about immersive experiences and how to bring this into like a museum or gallery setting. I've been thinking about a lot of projection mapping for this piece of like projecting these women's stories, these animations, probably across the city or in the different neighborhoods where they lived, where they went missing, to really bring more awareness to their stories. I would say that's what I love most about learning about immersive experiences, is because now I can take that and apply it to documentary filmmaking. So now I can figure out how to make my films more than just a film, but more of an art piece, more of a public installation. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Latoya. And it's amazing because although our conversations and this particular podcast as in that we this group that we have together have come from so many different disciplines that tangentially relate to film or directly relate to film, and yet at the same time there are so many things that kind of tie in, even what Alice was speaking about before, to your practice. And there's so much I'd like to discuss with you on immersive. You're the first person to really come on the podcast so far to speak about immersive installation and virtual reality, and how that can be used for ethical purposes. So I very much look forward to chuffing it up. And now, Emily, last but not least, we hand it over to you. Thank you. Oh, I think we're missing your audio.
Of course.
No worries.
Yeah, so I think uh, my general spiel will kind of be addressing a few things that I've been thinking about recently. I guess this podcast is catching me at an interesting time in thinking about my practice and my career and also just my life in general, I guess. And so I've been thinking largely about education, issues around class, and transparency in all different kind of ways. So, I mean, how I want to explore that is by talking about my relationship with film and how I kind of ended up where I am, and how I'm feeling about that, and how others might relate to that or how it might crack open some things. So I mentioned that I'm from Detroit. I began at a young age watching a lot of film. My father was a really big film lover. He still is. He would take us to the movies every week. His favorite film is Sound of Music, which is really funny if you know him. And he really loves kung fu films, so I grew up like loving the films of Bruce Lee. Um, and film was like a very present force in my young life, my childhood. And I really, my dream job when I was a child was to be a cinematographer. But not a dream job in the sense of like I thought that I could be one. Like, being a cinematographer to me as a child was like almost the equivalent of like being a princess or something. Like, I didn't think that it was like a real thing I could be. Um, Largely because that was just not of my world. Like I didn't have any kind of frame of reference for that kind of thing. And I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. My father was a cop, and my mom was a nurse, and really everybody else in my family were public service workers. And so I'm really the only person in my family who was interested in the arts or the humanities in a way outside of kind of like a hobby or like how my father enjoys watching films. And so I kind of grew up with that sense of it instilled in me, that it was a thing that was kind of like a thing I could dream about. And then in high school, I started doing photography through art class. And I had some really, as well as English, I started doing creative writing, and I had some really amazing teachers who believed in me. And it really instilled a sense that, like, oh, maybe this is something that is possible, or it's something that's quite real, or something I could pursue, um, which was really meaningful to me. And it's kind of something I think about with the importance of what it means to be a teacher and your relationship with students, and supporting their potential, because that was something that I experienced and was so meaningful to me. And so I had that in mind. Okay, I want to do something in the arts, maybe writing or, film or something before I got into college. But I kind of was still in that mindset of like, oh, I need to be practical. I need to make money. I knew I wasn't going to make a lot of money, and I was just going to accept that. But I was also kind of just like not really pushing the idea, like I hadn't revisited the idea of being a cinematographer or anything. Um, so I thought, I went into college thinking I was going to work in publishing, because I really love reading. And once I got to college, I met someone. I was in this like early admission program through University of Michigan, which is like this very weird program, where basically all the athletes and a lot of people from public schools in the Detroit area and other like low testing performing schools, your admission to University of Michigan is uh, based upon whether or not you complete this summer program before you start your first year. It's a very weird thing. And a lot of the people in the program are Black or from predominantly Black areas. And I met someone who's actually now an actor. And they told me about the film intro class, which I hadn't even thought of, or I wasn't even aware of, because I wasn't thinking about really studying film. And so I took my film intro class freshman year, and film felt like something real to me that I could sink my teeth into outside of just like the pleasure of watching it like on the couch or like going to the movies. Um, and I remember the intro class, basically the structure is you study one filmmaker per semester. And the semester we got was Ingmar Bergman, who I still really love. And I think that was like a great, kind of a really like intense throwing me into film studies, but it was really amazing. And then at University of Michigan, they kind of have this mix of things that you can do. You can dabble a little bit in film studies, and then you can kind of pick whatever production, pre or post, direction that you want. And I thought I might have done screenwriting, but I ended up doing cinematography, primarily in 16 millimeter. And it was tricky in college because narrative commercial filmmaking and television was really prominent in the department because it is not a part of the art school. Um, so I kind of felt a little lost. Also, I was like one of the only people of color in the department. Um, but I kind of got very lucky because U of M is in Ann Arbor, and the Ann Arbor Film Festival is in Ann Arbor, of course. So I saw that This was in my first year. I saw that they were hiring a programming intern, and I applied because I was interested in also kind of like the administrative stuff around film and around art. Because in my head, that was like practical. That was something that was like grounded. You know, there was some kind of path for that, even if it wasn't like a lucrative one. And yeah, so I started working at the Ann Arbor Film Festival, which I worked throughout college there. And that was the first time that I ever encountered experimental film, which was really kind of a really like crazy moment for me that really changed my life actually, because now it's the kind of area of film that I work in and have worked in since is experimental film and video, and moving image just generally. And it started at that point. And, it was really wild to be exposed to experimental film, not having any kind of frame of reference for it. I often think about when I'm doing things now is like, how do I reach people like me at that time who, had never seen an experimental film before, um, but kind of click with it or, are intrigued by it when they see it. And so yeah, I was doing cinematography and doing some kind of filmmaking, which ended up being a bit more experimental in college. But I still wanted to do admin work because I was like, I need to do something grounded. And so I never even thought about getting an MFA. I never thought, like, I've been telling people this lately that I didn't even know that that was like a thing or a possibility. It never crossed my mind. It never kind of like, oh, I can go get an MFA and like continue filmmaking and all of these things, even though that was something that really spoke to me or that I really loved. It was really integral to the way I expressed ideas. Because I was very much so at a point, and I feel like I'm still at a point where a lot of my ideas come to me in like images or things like that, or I just have an image that's stuck in my head. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go get a degree in arts admin, which, like I said, isn't, I thought like, okay, if I'm gonna do arts and humanities work, I'll do something practical like arts administration, and see. That's about as like official as it gets, I guess. So I came to School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and for years, and I studied arts administration and art history. Um, and SCIC was a really great place to end up. And I've been really lucky to just end up in these places that have these very rich, experimental um, video and film histories, because the video data bank is at SCIC. So, and the video data bank is a video art archive and distributor that is also kind of a part of the school, but it's a larger public facing organization. And so I started working there as a graduate distribution assistant, and I worked there all throughout my program, and I still work there. And it's been an interesting experience. That is, I have basically worked my way up to my job. I started as a graduate distribution assistant, and then when I graduated, there was a job to be on staff as just a distribution assistant. And then I think I've been doing the distribution job for maybe, I don't know, almost a year or so, maybe a little less than that. And so it's kind of all these things doing festival work. Um, I I am interested in programming for sure and curating, but that's kind of it's never been like my goal. And it's something that's always tricky, especially now that I've been thinking about all of this of like, what do I do? Or like, what do I want to do? And I don't know, I've never really felt comfortable being like, I'm a curator and programmer, or definitively say, like, that's what I want to do. I've done programs at different venues in Chicago. I just did a program at the Ann Arbor Film Festival around the films of Edward Owens. But for me, I really was always interested deep down in whether it was filmmaking or writing, but also education. I'm interested in academia, but not really because it's academia. But it's still that kind of space that I'm in. And yeah, I've been trying to use a lot of previous programs that I've done as less about like saying like this is the program and this is the work I am and here's my spiel that I put it all together, and using them more as just opportunities to kind of like, um, I guess if I can give an example, I had this professor in college who would do the format of his like film theory and criticism classes. He would show us a clip and talk about it at length and use film as a way to kind of give lectures, not just about film studies, but about, things like Marxism and all this, like really kind of uh, crazy things to put together with film. And I always kind of like to think about my programs as like lectures like that. I always want some kind of really in-depth conversational aspect after training, or some kind of lecture-based talk after the screening, that I almost do kind of treat like a lecture, I guess, or like I'm pretty like feeling like a little academic, maybe too much, but yeah. So I mean, everything that I kind of do, and even the work that I do at VDB, which is working with like galleries and museums and film festivals to circulate the works of the artists in the collection. It's also important to me that the Video Data Bank is an archive, and that it's based at this art educational institution, and what does that to engage with students and also to provide a greater context to the work in the collection outside of the means of circulating it or distribution, because you can kind of get caught up in just that like exchange of like renting and selling work. And that's not, I mean, it's meaningful, but it's not really that meaningful. Just the exchange of things, which is never something that I'm really interested in. And so, yeah, I'm kind of at a point where I want to explore filmmaking, and to explore more writing, while also kind of just, doing programming if it comes up and it feels right. I'm always just trying to think of like what feels right to do. It's hard to define what any kind of practice is. In the last few years, I'm just learning about the language of how you describe what your practice is. And I don't know, I kind of am hesitant to say, I guess I do anything, whether it's like a curator, artist, writer, programmer. But yeah, and so I've also just been, trying to reflect on my place and a lot of the institutions that I've worked in, and what does it mean to interrogate some of the status quo or some of the professionalism or some of the, like, I guess, lack of transparency. Really, because when I started doing this work, I kind of had this really weird moment, when I started working on staff at Video Data Bank, where I felt like I kind of disassociated from my life because I couldn't believe that I got to do the work that I do, which I feel so lucky to do. And it took a long time, and I think I'm still working on being like, oh yeah, I work in film, like I work with filmmakers, and I get on a daily basis, I get to watch experimental film and my work revolves around it. That was something that was so crazy to me to even like realize that life. So yeah, I'm kind of just in that moment where I'm trying to solidify things, but not really, but also just kind of like accept that maybe they're not very solid. And I'm quite young. So yeah, um, that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna bring this back over here to our view in studio, where I have the task of kind of like uniting everything that we've been talking about. And given also that it is quite a varied set of conversations that we're beginning here, you might find that even though probably typically for anybody who's heard this, um, they're thinking, my God, you already go off on many tangents. So I'll do my best this time to tie everything together. But I might do so in a little bit of a extraordinary way. Now, I'm also not, uh, say, exaggerating when I say that I've probably taken more notes on this episode than any other. At times, kind of like going through and creating a transcript, so I can kind of keep note of everything. But I want to take things probably from Latoya and then go outward from there, branch outward from there. Um, I'm very interested in this idea of, especially because there is a legitimate preference that occurs, I think, within film, and it's not necessarily bound to genre. We were talking about last week the maybe lack of importance or the falseness of these ideas of narrative or nonfiction and fiction and things like that, especially as we've gotten to the point where all of these different media languages are coalescing. I find very interesting, though, and the most interesting kind of plane on which they're coalescing to be the immersive design installation based world. Also, because movies are very interestingly an object that we enter into as a sort of like trance state that exists as, for all rights and purposes, kind of a two-dimensional object, though I think that you can argue that the screening space, the theatrical environment, the performative aspects of even being put into a theatrical space, that in itself, say, imbues the film experience with more than just a two-dimensional realm. But let's just say that if we're going to think about it from the standpoint of the video, the flattening of the video surface, the way in which video is so almost replaceable as walls, then we've gotten to a point now where we really do need to think about the way in which we're using video, for instance, as a design element, and how that design element then say imprints upon people within any given space, just like the design and architecture um, does. And of course, we've been dealing with this for a long time. Video advertising is nothing new. It's directly integrated into our space. And it's interesting too to think of, from what you're saying, Latoya, is very, very obvious and very true. The way in which we lag behind sometimes in implementing the things that advertisers are already putting into public spaces, for instance, and oftentimes for the sake of kind of indoctrination. That's not the case. For instance, with what Latoya is doing with museum design, which I think is an area that, despite the potential problems that we have with the museum as an institution or as a structure that is oftentimes controlled by a corporate board or used as a means of, let's say, blanketing over some of the capital atrocities that the museum comes to represent. The museum space itself is also at the same exact time, that point of entry, especially for kids in Chicago or kids in New York, myself included, um, uh, where the notion of being creative, the notion of finding a creative identity or of being able to express oneself outside of the very restricted and very fascistic order of a lot of public school curricula, that is a major event in the life of children. And so it brings me back to my daughter as I think about the exploration of these spaces. I'm a person who's very much, um, let's say, eh, given to um, uh, cynicism, especially when it comes to me about media. Um, Especially when it comes to me when I'm thinking about the way media is used as education as well. And when I say that, I mean particular motion picture or any sort of variant of it. The reason I do think that way is of course I'm really into John Baudrillard and Chilean Mbembe, and so those folks are talking about the way in which media is used as a nihilism, is used as a means of essentially blanketing the hallucinatory state created by a neoliberal and white supremacist basis for a political state. And yet, at the same time, what it is to be in that state of childlike wonderment, what my daughter goes through when she leaves, for instance, the Field Museum, which has, as I'm sure Latoya also would not uh, say disagree with, a history that is particularly problematic, as do all of the museums in Chicago. What she comes away with, though, my daughter, is this renewed sense of the world, of a love and an interests of things that truly, for me, is miraculous and drives my own. She's like my anchor in this world when things feel heavy. The light that she can get from some of these experiences and the true educational value that is imbued in these experiences by people who are loving administrators of or are loving designers of this work, like Latoya. I think that that cannot be understated, despite the fact that we also have a virtual reality, which is quite horrifying in its perfect implementation. Right? We've have the $3,500 Apple augmented reality. I had to speak that out today, and the chances are, the way in which this technology begins to work upon us is slowly and eventually it'll get to its VR 3.0 stage where it no longer requires an apparatus and it is simply administered to us sublingual or subdermal, who knows. But the point being that these elements of immersive design are actually embedded in filmmaking practice and the magic lantern and the performance in sitting about a fire and telling stories, etc. And since the beginning of artistry in the cave and thinking about the way in which we use expression, the idea of taking that expression and making it total, this sort of totalitarian approach to it, for better or for worse, is, I think, the ultimate goal of a lot of the artists at work. And I'll speak to Emily. Um, Emily's recounting reminds me of a lot of things that I encountered as a kid myself, in the sense that I was the only person in my family who was into art, or even given the luxury of being able to be into art. I've spoken about my grandmother bought me my first piano, and this is a woman who cleaned houses for 40 years, having immigrated from Costa Rica, and not speaking very much English at all. And to give me that was a privilege. Film was that too, but it was also seen as that's not the real life to live. That is the dream life, and expect the real world. And though I think that my own upbringing, I was lucky to see elements of both working class life and then this bourgeoisie life of being in the suburbs of Chicago. I began to use film as a refuge, and used film in that sense to put on character, to put on a mask, and through it escape into a world that allowed me to assimilate into a sort of toxic, and in the suburbs of, as you can mention, you can also know, Alice is from Evanston, and I went to high school in Evanston, a place of extraordinary racism, despite the fact that it is also, as thinks of itself as like this white liberal haven. It's a history of redlining, and its history of completely neglecting people of color within the city is well documented. And recently, of course, the subject of a PBS documentary. The microcosm of that place and how it relates to cinema through Mean Girls too, and through like the other cultural references of the North Shore, John Hughes, etc., is the fantastic BS bubble that actually hides a much seedier place that I went through myself, and brings me into, in part, also like actually the Ingmar Bergman. Well, Ingmar Bergman was a refuge for me too at that point as well. Again, for better for worse, and I recognize the potential problematic role of Bergman, but from Wild Strawberries, Persona, Cries and Whispers, Winter Light and the Silence, and I've been writing down all the things, all the movies that themselves allowed me to understand an experimental cinema before I encountered experimental cinema. While I was unable to catch Emily's presentation at Ann Arbor Film Festival this year, I had arrived afterwards. I was very much excited to, so I was very sad that I didn't get to. But at the same time, I can attest that Ann Arbor was an experience for me this year that did, say, reinvigorate my encounters with an experimental film community that I do think has ethical practices and can actually unite in a community way, to maybe take on some of the some of the concerns of filmmaking as we go forward. And Emily's concerns, I think I mirror as well. It's the Latoya also said it about going back home. Now getting the connections, now figuring out how to do the work within Chicago, which I never figured out. I never worked in the Chicago film industry because nobody would ever hire me. But the idea of traveling from New York to LA or whatnot, and having to orient yourself, recontextualize yourself, and into both film industry as well as film community environments. Those things have been very difficult for me. And I've never really spoken to Emily before, but I've been following your work too, Emily, and also moreover what people in the community say about you, and that is that essentially you are one of the folks from this generation that is doing the work to essentially open up, to end some of the gatekeeping practices that had been traditionally the impression, at least, that people had of the Chicago film community. And I'm very happy to see that these things are changing, especially as there's been generational changeover in the access of not-for-profit arts organizations and administration. Now, this is how I'm ending, Alice. So what is this all kind of bring me back to? Is just like, again, it's like, Alice, I don't think I've ever shown you Stuck in the 90s yet, but I'll show you. your work, it resonates with me because at a certain point I was making a series called Stuck in the 90s, and I star as something called the prom date fuck. And my words are my own words, and they don't reflect necessarily the opinions of Chicago filmmakers, so keep that in mind. um, and the work itself is also this burial into the hyper real tumble of thinking about machismo, thinking about the way in which manhood is represented in my childhood was in itself placed upon me as a construct. And so I find that there's a lot actually very very similar. This confessional video portal that's also apparent in Alice's work is also very much there. There's a way in which actually what Alice is doing, and it's interesting. It's maybe the odd one out of the series in the sense that it's not a traditional, or there's not really necessarily, I'd say, a basis in traditional documentary in the work, but it's a expressive, it's a personal expressive confessional, and I begin to think about the ways in which those things are documents and how that auto narrative, right, is in sense is not an auto ethnography, but it's rather this sort of auto narrative of an unconscious space of the tracking and cartography of dream space and nightmare space. What that does to really truly reflect and represent one's identity. I think that the thing that really bound my work together was that I always thought about it as one whole, as that every short film that I was doing was a way of picking away. I was obsessed with the idea of the feature because I thought the feature had the length to carry you within to the trance state, to establish a world, and then to rip that world from underneath, just like Persona, for instance, by Bergman. While experimental cinema sometimes does not, say, care about the establishment of a world, sometimes it doesn't care necessarily about the establishment of a character or a diegetic space. Although I would say the trance space that are created even by structuralist films could maybe cynically be called a little bit of an illusory diegetic space in and of itself, maybe of a cold and academic world sometimes, not to diss too much. But the point I'm getting at is that there's world building, space building, and an investment into the immersive as a means of radicalizing, as a means of creating an embedded experience that potentially actually can speak with what VR was maybe originally called by some folks within the VR community as the empathy machine or the empathy box. That is there actually a way to get there? I'll end by saying, it's beautiful to be able to share these kind of half baked ideas with folks who are practically carrying out their work every day and changing our community here in Chicago. So, with that being said, I am going to pass this off to the roundtable discussion, and please feel free to discuss.
I mean, I can jump in. One thing that stood out, you were saying that it was hard for you to find a job here in Chicago, like after leaving New York and LA. And I experienced the same thing, like coming back to Chicago. I was like, am I echoing? I am.
We're going to go ahead and we'll mute everybody else, but I think that just be careful that you don't have a browser open that has the movie, or rather the podcast showing. Sorry, everybody.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that was something that I experienced too. Like, and I was so nervous about it, like coming back to Chicago because I made such good connections. Like as a first time, like now I feel like okay, I'm coming out of grad school. I've met all these documentary filmmakers, all these prominent filmmakers. I've interned. I've done all the work that you're supposed to do from the ground up. And now to have to uproot and move back home where you don't have any of that, like gave me the worst anxiety because I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? Like I was really conflicted. Like, should I come back? Like, if I come back, like, how do I start over? Because that's essentially what you're doing. Like, when I graduated, now was in 2012. So like remote work wasn't like really a huge thing then. It was, people probably were doing it, but not like now, so everyone was still meeting in offices and meeting together. So moving away, I felt like I was really going to miss out on being a documentary filmmaker. I didn't think I really had a chance of still picking that up coming back to Chicago, because I would say in 20, like around that time, 2012, between 2010 and 2012, the documentary community here was really small. Like you really had Cartimquin, like they were like the main ones. Outside of that, I wouldn't say it didn't exist. It was just really very, very tight knit, And so without being in it and not having a film or not practicing the work, you kind of felt like an outsider a little bit if you didn't know everyone at Carton Quinn or other filmmakers. Like you kind of just out there, and not really having a lot of resources. So I'm really grateful of having to, cross over into museum stuff, because that kind of saved me. It really did. Like it gave me another purpose and something else to focus on. And then I figured out how to circle back the documentary stuff into that practice.
Yeah, I had to have you unmute me, but yeah, I definitely relate, in I guess in my own way, to um, maybe feeling isolated um, in trying to find video work in Chicago, and my situation is at least like a little bit different from both of you guys. Honestly, it's different from like most of the people that I show work with in general, because like I went to school for like one semester and then like I dropped out, and it was like, I don't know, a lot of people I know have experienced the same thing. It's like a lot of people, it's not just like transitioning, but I know like a lot of people who transition during school and just leave and don't necessarily feel like they can go back. Um but I was feeling very like isolated and alone, and like the only reason that I was even involved in experimental video to begin with, I realized that I didn't talk about this because sometimes I just forget. There's like so many, I don't know, I get like very much into specific tunnels of what I'm thinking about. But was somebody who at least either of you might know who he is, but Carl L. Caesar, who used to work. He has works at the Data Bank Chicago, um, but he used to be a big part of the Chicago film community. Then experimental film community. Then he moved to New York a few years ago. But I actually had him as an adjunct professor for one, like two terms, like one semester at Carleton College when I was there, very briefly in Minnesota. And he, like, I don't know, it became my whole world. Basically, is like that's all I cared about. Like I didn't realize I was going to go into that was independent. It's just like I fell in love with his class, and um that was just like nothing else really mattered to me in the school, and they didn't work. This administration hated that. They were like, no, you can't do school this way. And I was like, I don't know what to do. So I kind of just like was forced out um on like academic probation. um but I was like just living with my parents in Evanston, and then I like randomly, Carl reached out, not even to me, just like I was following him on Instagram. He was like, "Does anybody want to work for me?" And I was like, "Yes." And it was like after like I hadn't even quit my job yet. I was working as like a tennis coach at Northwestern tennis camps, and I hated it. My boss was so annoying, and like there was such a, oh god, it was awful. But I was doing that, and I don't know, I was feeling like very isolated creatively. It's like I don't know, I was like making stuff on my own kind of, but again, I had no institution. Like I didn't even have, my friends were all still in school mostly, or I don't know, depressed and just at home. So I was like, um, I'm very uncertain about what to do with my life. And Carl gave me this opportunity to start doing like visual effects work for him, even though I hadn't done that before, but just kind of because I was vaguely learning about that world. And he does like very cool experimental documentary stuff. And I don't know, he's let me be a part of that process. And I don't know, I don't do it's like you talked about this a little bit. I mean, I don't I've been like skirting in and out of documentary versus narrative because um, I don't know. I just like world building and I like fantasy, and my day to day life involves a lot of rewriting my interactions as fantasy. But in that way, it's not necessarily that clear of a distinction between the two because, like, it's like on what you see on the video isn't necessarily that different from like how I'll maybe behave like in real life. And I think that that's something that I've connected with like certain people and but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know exactly where I was going. Just like sometimes like individual people can make you feel very connected. And I reached out to Onion City like on a whim. Like applied with Film Freeway, and I actually thought that I got rejected because they accidentally sent a rejection, or I don't know if they did it. I don't know exactly what happened there, but then they accepted me, and but I had been like even like outside of Carl, it's like I didn't have like any sort of graduate degree. I was just like making stuff. And I guess I was doing music videos that in Chicago, and that was like a really again somebody just took a chance on me. It was somebody that I didn't really know that well, who I saw was doing really cool music. I love music. It's like the other main thing I do. But
No,
yeah,
I
it's
think
so
like
important
what
is
you
connection.
just stated too. Well, yeah, I'll say, and not this is, again, not to like to shout out to anybody in Evanston or rather to put them on the spot, but Evanston does not go to do a good job about the artists that are there. They do a good job about the artists who like get in with the Evanston arts community, but a lot of the folks just kind of get totally um, either they get adopted eventually into the Chicago arts community, and especially thinking about the music history of Evanston, or they're just like loner artists or outsider artists oftentimes. And so I always felt that that was the case with us. Like we had some folks who were you know who are into to helping us out, I guess. And I say us is just like some kids making weirdo movies and hip hop beats. But like that was our thing, and like the group of people I hung out with. I would say that like after I went to NYU, like, and you start making weirdo stuff at an institution like that, and you don't make it very far, both socially as well as within the administration. Um, and so although I was doing documentary, like, because that was like the hustle kind of, it was like I could do documentary, I could even do cinema history, writing, post-production, editing, a 16 millimeter cinematography, like Emily's saying. All those things are skills that you learn, but then you have the thing that you do best. And if that thing is really like an expression of a part of yourself or a part of a world that's not necessarily, let's say, immediately corporately friendly, then they give up on you completely. But I'd say, like, for instance, with you, Alice, or like again, a weird thing happened, and then I was able to, through our social media, receive Alice's work, watch it myself, and I hadn't seen that work as in regards to the selection committee, but then to be able to, as part of the selection committee, was actually a very transparent process by Nikki Nee to talk directly with Nikki, who looked at the work. And these are important because they actually show the dynamics, like the transparency behind what happens sometimes within any film festival selection. And that would make a difference between you being here and talking to us, had you not actually represented yourself too and spoken to us in that environment, which was very important. To also know that, yeah, everybody tells you not to stick up for yourself or to contact or whatnot, but actually sometimes it's very helpful, and it isn't fair who gets listened to and who doesn't. I'll say like this is to Emily's point also, and actually kind of also a question back to you, Emily. They're not, I would say, although there are, right, like in experimental film, it's maybe more common. There are not a lot of film, say, folks who have done all the ends of things from the curatorial, the programming, from the academic, from the filmmaking, from the cinematography standpoint, knowing the technical route, and then doing distribution coordinating, which is like literally looking at every aspect from a curatorial perspective, including the technical aspect of how to best display a work. And so I wanted to know of how those practices have all affected one another. And then also, to just pitch in, the MFA thing was not anything that I thought I could go through. And that the MFA route I did eventually, it's only good for your practice. It doesn't really do much else.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's something I'm like revisiting at the moment, but who knows? Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I the reason I've done all those things is because I was interested in just learning about every aspect of film and like any kind of thing to do with film. Um, and with arts admin specifically, like I was initially interested in film festival work, so I wanted to work in film festivals. So I initially did an internship at the Cannes Film Festival, which like solidified me not wanting to work in commercial film, because it was so. I mean, it's like a completely different world than the Ann Arbor Film Festival that I was working at. So I was like, okay, getting a sense of film festivals, and I was making films and I was doing film studies. And then coming to SAIC and then at VDB was kind of like this really niche thing that just kind of happened, where I was learning about distribution, which has been really helpful in connecting all of these things. Because it's often like I'm working with curators who don't have that kind of like knowledge about the way these different parties are interacting to get the work to the screen, um, which has been very helpful for what I do. And I also a year ago I wasn't sure when I got out of grad school if I wanted to work in film festivals or like work in some kind of nonprofit organization just in general, like Video Data Bank, or work in museums. So I did a curatorial research associate position at the Block Museum at Northwestern, because I was like, what is it like to work in museums? I kind of just wanted to know what it was like to work in all these kinds of different institutions so I could understand, when I'm interacting with people, what perspective they're coming from, and how they're thinking differently about work, and also just deciding like what kind of space I felt most comfortable working in, and like what the different kind of approach is to. Yeah, I don't know if I'm cut out for like academic museum kind of work. It's I don't know if that's my thing, but it's um, and now, yeah, I mean, I'm really just trying to like move forward with all of this information, kind of condensing it into a general understanding of the industry, and kind of linking all of these gaps, in transparency, whether it's, having experience on submission committee, review team, and understanding what that process is like, or just like what is the process of like paying an artist or something like that. Um, it's something I'm still figuring out. Is like just the kind of immense like array of things I've gotten to experience and how to put that all together. Yeah.
I'm going to say that this is the final words round. Our hour and a half went by so fast. But I mean, that's also because this is a very stimulating conversation. I'll leave it with this. I think that even if they were right trying to make the best or worst films possible, just like garbage escapist work and whatnot, The industry seriously does not consider the better filmmakers of its generation ever. They look for the folks who will fit within this sort of assembly line structure, and it will backfire. And I think it's already starting to, in a sort of very slow wave. Eventually, people, and I think that the pandemic did this, and I think a number of insurgent countercultures are doing this. Uh, Emphasizing how the intellect of a work, how the lack of condescending material is actually key to ensuring that there is an audience going forward. We're not all actually that stupid, and we see the absurdity of things as they're enveloping. And then I also think that it's important, like, to reiterate that's because there are so many filmmakers. I know everyone here can name filmmaker friends of ours who are so talented and have to figure out how to go through any number of different routes, whether it's multiple filmmakers who are librarians, multiple filmmakers who are working in warehouses. Clint Enns worked last week, was one of our guests on the show. Works in a warehouse as well, and is one of the is an extraordinary, acclaimed, internationally shown Rotterdam, Ann Arbor, etc. Like, it doesn't matter because they're only elevating the people who they think won't be a risk to them. That's mine.
Yeah, it's oh.
No, I mean, you can talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, is that's something that I think a lot about at Video Data Bank. Working with artists that really, I mean, there's not really any money in this kind of work. And for Video Data Bank, we're a nonprofit organization through the school, and our revenue doesn't cover our operational budget. So it's kind of just this circulation point. It's and it's always interesting meeting like younger students at SAIC who are in the film department, and kind of trying to talk to them about, what are you hoping to do after this, and trying to very nice and like hopeful, but also really practical. It's a really tough balance because, yeah, I mean, there are these, to us, like famous filmmakers who make really incredible work, who their primary job is not being a filmmaker, and they're not making a living off of their films. And that's just, so it's a tough reality. And it's, you know, to say like, I'm going to make these films, I'm going to make this kind of film is, I think it's courageous, when, especially if you don't have the privilege to be able to sustain that just by, like, I don't know, having your parents pay your rent or something. Like, it's tough. It's choice. I feel like there's a lot of filmmakers in this community specifically that sacrifice a lot of time and energy, and money to make work. And there's a lot of pressure, when you want to make work, to be like, gosh, I don't know if I have the time or energy. Like Latoya, it's, making films on top of her museum designer job, like that just sounds so overwhelming to me. But, I'm sure you feel like it's a thing you have to do, you want to make film. Yeah, I mean, it's tough.
Yeah, it's extremely hard. I'm gonna say just one thing quick. It's extremely hard because getting grants is like, it sometimes feel nearly impossible as an emerging filmmaker because they only give out so many grants. Like, it's like hundreds of people are going after a grant that's only probably going to go to either one person or two people tops, or three max. And so, yeah, I feel like for me, what's been working and the realization that I've had is that I have to have a full time job in order to make the film, so that I have the income to help pay for my film, so that I don't rely on not getting grants if I apply for them and I don't get them. Like, I'm still having some kind of income coming in to keep the film going. That's been one of my worst fears of diving back into documentary filmmaking, is taking on a film and it takes me 10 years to make it because I can't come up with the money to pay for it, you know? So yeah, I think I really feel for these younger filmmakers, and even in all ages, people who fall under that emerging filmmaker title. Is just challenging. Like, and then a lot of companies like ITVS, like they want you to have an experienced producer on your film. You know, it's not all what it kind of cracks up to be. You know, they say inclusive, but it's really not. And so, yeah, it's like you got to read the fine print on a lot of these grants, that they want something a little extra with you applying. Like they want you to want an experienced producer or some other kind of things that you probably can't sign up for or don't want to really agree to do. So it's I've been looking at that too, like all of the little pitfalls that traps you can fall into being in this industry. And to be honest with you, I that's why I've made the conscious decision of doing both, of doing museum content and doing documentary, because I can always step away from documentary and just focus on museum if I have to. You know, I'm not tied to this one thing, and that was a hard decision to make. You know, when I came out of college, I wanted to be tied to just being just a documentary filmmaker. I never thought I would be doing museum stuff like for real. Like it was always a dream, but I never thought it would happen. And now I wouldn't change it for the world. You know, I'm like, I like doing museum stuff. I like a budget given to me and I don't have to go out and beg for it. You know, I like someone giving me money to make something, you know, and I don't have to fill out hundreds of grants to try to make a project happen. So
I'm gonna say this is last word. Alice,
Yeah, can I just say a little thing?
please do it. You're gonna do the bye. You know the thing we do.
The what?
Okay,
No, what are you doing?
Okay, at the end, you're just gonna go bye, and then we all do it. And then we
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I don't need to make this that long, but it relates to everything that you guys have been talking about. I mean, the first thing, or not the first thing, but like when I did my little presentation at the beginning, I was talking about this like feature that I want to work on. But the thing is, that's like the other thing of like trying to get other people to work on. And the reason that I like Angel I shot like in a very short period of time just by myself was that like I'm not like the people that I want to work with who want to be involved in this need money. Like we all need money. Like we can't just be like, and that's the thing is like, I don't know. That's why I've been maybe wanting to make something that's a little bit more planned out, because I've realized that like in order to even try to get funding of any sort from anyone, I gotta like I gotta make it not even more traditional necessarily, but make it at least appear to be more traditional. Like put on the like facade of okay, here's a narrative story that it could be, and pretend like it's that, and then make the thing that's gonna be way more insane than that, but based off of that. And I don't know. I think that that's something a lot of people relate with, is trying to like fit into boundaries. And I don't know. This is the last thing, Latoya. I don't know the field museum. I don't know. I was actually like growing up. I loved the like the evolution exhibit so much. And it's like I don't know. I think about that like often in terms of like I don't know the work that I want to do being something that like is kind of like taking a history of the world and making it not just the history of the world, but like reconstructing I don't know, like an immersive but like emotionally compelling narrative for I think like science and like stuff that you don't usually think of as being interesting and fun is very important, and I think it's really cool what you do. So I guess on that note,
much love to everybody and sponsors. You hear it? Send us grant money.
send us grant money. Movie Metrograph, who
Metrograph,
I was DMing earlier.
No, everybody. Bye.
Bye.